Well, hello, everybody. Great to be with you on this Super Bowl Sunday. My name is Alex Graham, and I'm the Torrance campus pastor here at Journey of Faith. Hey, I get to launch today a new series of messages called Even If. This is a 4-week message series, and every week we're going to be looking at a story from the first half of the Bible, which is called the Old Testament. The Old Testament is full of stories of how God interacted with people before the birth of Jesus. So these are ancient stories, and they are meant to inspire and teach us about what it means to have a relationship with God. And the 4 stories that we're going to be looking at during this series, they all share something in common. They are stories about people facing unexpected problems who choose to trust in God and follow Him even through those challenges. Now, for those of you who are already Christians, we hope this series is an encouragement to be more faithful, to trust God more with your lives. Now, if you're with us and you're just exploring God and faith, I think you'll find these stories interesting and inspiring, and they will give you a great picture of the amazing strength and compassion that Jesus offers us if we allow Him to lead our lives. Now, the series is actually directly inspired by a similar series that our student ministries pastors are doing right now for our middle school and high school students. So if you have a student at home, they'll be hearing about these same topics in their videos. Our student ministry staff chose this topic because they knew here at the beginning of the year that every student out there has hopes and plans and dreams and ideas for what the future might look like, but they're also at an age where they can wrestle with the reality of the unknown. Because even if they have those plans, the world has been teaching us pretty loudly lately that we don't really know what to expect from what the future holds. So the question for our middle schoolers and high schoolers, and now for all of us, is this. Let's take a look. Will I follow God even if things don't go the way that I planned? To kick us off, let me tell you a story about something that happened in my life that certainly was not planned for me. A few years ago, when I worked at a previous job, we had a nearby gas station that had one of those automated car washes in the back. But the problem was that for all the years that I had stopped at that gas station for gas and snacks and other things, the car wash had always been out of service. Now, I assumed it had been broken beyond repair or something like that. But one day, I noticed that new signs started going up in the back of the gas station, and they said that the car wash was going to reopen. They were handmade signs, and they said things like, "We're going to have the best car wash ever," and "Best car wash you've ever had coming next week." And I decided to believe the hype of those signs. So the next week, I was driving by and I noticed that, yes, indeed, the car wash seemed to be open. So I stopped in, filled up on gas, and while I was paying at the pump, I added the car wash option, and it printed out my little receipt. And then I drove around to the back. This all seems very normal. I was at the entrance of the car wash, and I went to that machine where you put in your code. So I stopped, rolled down my window, boop, 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 put in my code, and everything seemed to be fine. The garage door in front of me went up, and I drove into the car wash. But then, instead of the spinning brushes starting up and the water jets starting to spray, those were all there, by the way, the equipment was there, but instead, in from a side door hobbled the sweetest old Polish couple you could ever imagine, a husband and wife. I knew they were Polish, by the way, because they were yelling at each other, and I recognized some of the words. And the woman was wearing one of those like headscarf babushka things, so it was really adorable. Anyway, this couple ambles in, and they were dragging with them a hose and a bucket behind them. And then they didn't say a word to me, they just started spraying the car and washing the car. The big brushes never turned on. The water jets never sprayed. The big fan at the end never roared to life to dry my car. It wasn't a mechanical car wash at all. It was just Bobcha and Dziadek car wash, which those are the Polish words for grandma and grandpa. I looked it up. Anyway, I had a decision to make at that moment. I had believed the hype about this car wash. Was I going to continue to believe these car wash signs? They had promised me this was going to be great. And even if the format of the car wash wasn't what I was expecting, should I stick with it? And at that moment, I decided, sure. There was no reason why this sweet couple couldn't do a great job. And they did. It was a little weird, but it was a great car wash. Now, that that whole gas station actually closed entirely the next week. So I'm not really sure what happened there. My made-up version of events was that those were just kind of the grandparents of the owner, maybe, and he begged them to come in as one like last-ditch effort to rejuvenate the failing business, but it didn't work. That's a sad version. But anyway, it's not even the point of the story. The point is that that was definitely a situation that I couldn't have seen coming. The kind of car wash, as I mentioned, was not what I had planned. The old couple maybe being asked by someone else to come in and run the car wash is probably not what they planned. And the closing of the gas station next week probably wasn't what the owner had planned. In life, we are constantly faced with things that we could not have seen coming. Now, some of these things are funny and good. We can tell stories, I suppose, about them. But many of those unexpected situations are life-altering, faith-shaking in a way that we are not huge fans of. Think of the situation where you've gotten used to maybe your health or normalcy, but an unexpected diagnosis or accident changes the course of your family's dreams and expectation. Or imagine a young person who is used to success and support in high school, but then they get a rejection letter from a college that forces them to rethink the vision they had for the next steps of their future. Or think about a job for which you thought you might retire someday from that job, but it goes sour and turns into a place of pain and it forces you to put off your plans. What role does God play in those situations? Especially if you're a person of faith, a person who has a relationship with God, how do you reconcile God's promise to love you and be with you and rescue you with the hardship that you're facing? Well, today we're going to put all of that into our main point, and it's going to look like this. Even if we don't know the future, we can still be faithful. When we face challenges and problems and interruptions to the picture that we've imagined of what our future would hold, God does not abandon us. Those hardships are not a sign that God is distant. Instead, if we choose to be faithful, relying on God's strength, we can experience His love and His nearness with an intensity we could not have imagined before. Now, to illustrate this, like I said, we're going to look at a story from the Old Testament. This story comes from the book of Daniel, and it's a story that some of you may have heard when you were in children's services or Sunday school at church when you were little. It has a powerful message that's easy for children to understand. But honestly, also, it might be brand new for others of you, and that's fantastic. Whether it's familiar or new, I'd like us to be able to look at it with fresh eyes. Despite being understandable to children, it is still a mighty story of faith that should inspire and challenge us as adults. The story is about these three young men. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, these are not common names nowadays, and that's because they were Babylonian names from around 600 BC when these three guys lived. Now, in the few hundred years before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were born, God's people at the time, the Israelites, had gone through a long season of being led by different kings. Some of those kings, especially near the beginning, were good. We'll even tell one story about the most famous good king, King David, in the fourth message in this series. But over the course of the time of the kings, as they handed down power one to the other, they gradually got worse and worse and started leading their people to abandon God and follow their own sin. And all the while during that process, God was warning His people through prophets and by saying things like, listen, you are my special chosen people, but if you refuse to follow me and put all of your hope in the more and more evil kings, I'm going to remove my protection from you. I'll still love you, I'll be with you, but your enemies will come and conquer you, and you will not like that. Well, maybe you can guess what happened, exactly what God said would happen. His people kept going further and further away from following Him. So God allowed a foreign nation, Babylon, to swoop in and conquer Jerusalem, where the Jewish people had their home. The Babylonians, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, were the biggest military empire of their time. And they actually had an interesting conquering strategy in which they wouldn't just destroy their enemies completely. Instead, their plan had to do with strengthening their own empire. So instead of just killing everybody, they went through the conquered Jewish people and picked out the best and the brightest and forced those people to go back to Babylon, where they would train them to serve in the Babylonian government. The Babylonians were kind of like the Borg from Star Trek. Those of you who understand this will understand that they were out to assimilate and become stronger. So for those nerds out there, you understand what I'm saying here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were part of the group that were forced to go to Babylon and serve a foreign king. By the way, this season that I'm describing in Jewish history, when they were conquered militarily and sent to be strangers in a foreign land, is called this. It's called the exile. Now, the exile was a super difficult time for God's people, but one amazing thing happened during it. Real faith got a chance to shine. Listen, it's easy to follow God in good, safe times, but it's often the case that faith really comes alive, really means something when it's put to the test. And the Jewish people got to experience that in a major way while living as captives in Babylon. Hey, what tests do you feel like you're facing right now? Do any of you feel like you're living in a season of exile? I know there are situations in my life where my beliefs or morals or my view of the world make me feel like I am living in a foreign place, where the world around me, it's so obviously not the place of peace and hope that I want it to be, that I can feel like a stranger in a strange and difficult land. This past year has accelerated that feeling for many of you. I know that to be true. Now, just like was asked of the Jewish people, the question has been posed to us. When we're living on foreign turf, in a world that is not our world, how do we act? How do you behave? How do you stay faithful to God? Those were the questions that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were about to face. So let me read you the story. Here's what happens during their time in Babylon. I'm going to read it to you. It starts in Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue, 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messages to the high officers and officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provisional officials to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all these officials came, and they stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and other musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue." Now, even in the way this is written, with all the long lists, you can tell that this is meant to be a huge spectacle. Those lists of all the people invited and then the instruments that they're used, those are supposed to paint a picture of how grand and awe-inspiring, how lavish this ceremony was. People in power are often addicted to aggrandizing their own celebrations, aren't they? But it wasn't all just spectacle. This celebration actually came with a threat. The king also included this at the end of the order: anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, right then, as they read this, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were God followers, had a decision to make. They needed to decide if they were going to bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar, which definitely would have been the safe route, or were they going to be faithful to God? Now, incredibly, at the moment when the music starts playing, they chose not to bow down to the statue. The music started up, everyone else bows, and they are caught just standing there. Now, right after that, they are ratted out to the king by a couple jealous competitors, and he flips out. He flies into a rage, he orders them brought before him, and he gives them one last angry chance to bow down to him. But again, they stand firm. In fact, here's what they say. With all the gentleness and respect they can muster, also with confidence, they say this. They say, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty." And the next line here is mega important, especially for our series. Here's what they say: "But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." These were young, smart, educated, promising young men who had a picture in their mind of what their future might bring. Maybe that future now included helping the Jewish people as much as they could as they ran their areas of government. Maybe they wanted to personally have a family and children so that at least some later generations would survive the exile. Surely they hoped that they wouldn't be murdered by an angry king, but they did not waver. They were motivated more by being connected to God than being connected to their own dreams and expectations. Even if this was the end of the road, they chose to be faithful. That is incredible. And now let me tell you what the result of that faithfulness was. After the king gives them their last chance and they still refuse to bow down to the idol, he makes good on his promise and he throws them into a blazing furnace. He executes them for their beliefs. In fact, he makes the fire so hot that the soldiers who throw them into the furnace die from the heat when they're nearby. In that moment, it was not looking good for our boys Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but then a miracle occurs. Nebuchadnezzar and his cronies that he still has left that aren't burned up are standing around by the furnace when the king looks inside the fire and he says, wait a minute, didn't we throw 3 guys in there? And his guys are like, yeah, we did. But the king then responds like this, look, he says, look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Listen, who was that 4th person? Now, some people validly think it might have been a protecting angel. That's valid, but I'm of the opinion that Nebuchadnezzar here was actually way more correct than he could possibly have known. Even if they didn't know his name yet, we know what Son of God performs miracles and never abandons his people. It's Jesus. Inside of the fire, inside of the greatest trial that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would ever face, Jesus was with them. Now, please know, he was always with them, but inside of that fire, he was with them in an extreme and a powerful way. I don't know about you, but I spend a ton of my life running away from problems, the fires in my life. But when I read something like this passage, it makes me want to reconsider that impulse. If it means experiencing God in that way with a clear closeness like that, maybe it's worth going through the trials and challenges that I face. By the way, before we leave the story, let me just finish it up because Nebuchadnezzar, he can't believe his eyes. Nebuchadnezzar, sorry. He calls the 3 men out of the fire and they're untouched. The author of the story reports that they don't even smell like smoke. I think that is such a beautiful detail to include. And Nebuchadnezzar praises the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and gives them a promotion, although my guess is that they probably would have rather just been done with this king. But these 3 guys continue to have an opportunity to speak into the life of the king and the direction of the country, to show God's love to a person who had been their enemy, still was their enemy. So the story stands as one of the great examples of God's presence revealed by enduring struggles with faithfulness. Now, in the time we have left, I want to give us 2 ways that I think we could mirror the decisions of those 3 young men, which I think will help us get closer to the result that they had, which was a stronger, miraculously vibrant connection to God. The first way we can mirror them is this: reject false friends that masquerade as certainty. That might sound a little fancy, so here's what I mean. First of all, by the way, I'm not talking about rejecting your human friends. That's the exact opposite of what I'm saying. It's probably the last thing in the world that we need right now, people rejecting their friends. Instead, I'm using false friends to signify something more conceptual, ideas or influence in our lives that want to lie to us and claim that they can offer certainty over our futures, when that's just not true. For those 3 young men, their false friend was the king's favor. They were told that if they gained that, they'd be safe. Now, for us, it's different. Maybe it's our insurance companies or mortgage banks or the websites that store all our passwords. They want to make us feel like we're in good hands, that they can offer us stability against the challenges of the future. I was just watching the local news a few mornings ago, and one of the commercials that was happening in between was a lawyer. And in his commercial, he said that his firm had a combined 50 years of experience, and so that, therefore, we could trust him. But I thought about that, and that could mean they have 50 people on their staff, and they've all been there just brand new this year. We all spin things to get people to trust us. That's how our culture works. There are false friends, too, of alcohol and illegal substance abuse and extramarital affairs that promise peace and escape, but can't sustain those promises. We might even look at our own history of stability as a false friend sometimes. The thinking is that things have been pretty good so far, so surely that means that if I get the right job and the right family, things will just keep being pretty good, right? No. Ask anyone who has been through an unexpected crisis, and they'll tell you that's not how the world works. But even some of us who have gone through crisis, we return to believing that surely there's something in this life that can guarantee our protection because it is such an attractive lie. We want security. We want to know that we are safe into the future. But listen to me, almost all of those things that offer surety are false friends. They masquerade as helpful when they're really empty shells, no better able to offer security than wishful thinking. And they need to be called out for it, for the fraud and their inability to help us. By the way, you should still have insurance. I want you to be wise, but we cannot be hoodwinked into thinking that that kind of thing will suffice as our sole protection from all of life's challenges. No amount of money, no amount of backup plans can shield us from the challenges that life will bring. Now, here's a big example. I really want to point out something specific, a false friend that I think we really need to take seriously in our world today, and it's this: fear. In my opinion, fear is the biggest false friend our society is being seduced by right now. We have been taught that if we just are fearful enough, just worried and panicked enough, then we will be safe and proven right. That if we can claim that enough people who disagree with us are the enemy and they're out to get us and ruin us, then we'll be vindicated and proven to have great sense, and that will protect us. If we keep those bad people out, we'll be more secure. We've been trained to vilify each other, to promote fear as a warped method of finding protection in our own sense of peace. It is crazy for us to think that way, but it's effective because fear is a powerful false friend. So think about this week. Who have you been taught to fear? Who have you been told to be wary or suspicious of to protect yourself or society from destruction? People with a different skin color, maybe? Maybe people with a different sexual orientation or view on sexuality than you have. Maybe it's somebody in power for you, like a boss or a politician, like Nebuchadnezzar was to our heroes. Maybe you've been taught to fear doctors or people who have a different religion or no religion at all. Who has fear told you is the enemy? You know who is not scared of those people, whoever's on your list? Jesus isn't scared. He knows that those people are not our enemy. He loves those people, and he wants us to follow the example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to be faithful despite our fear. They were taught to fear the king for their own safety, but they understood that there's only one place that real safety comes from, one person that offers what really matters in life, an eternal relationship with God, and that's God himself. So when the time came to kowtow to fear, those young men recognized it, and they rejected it as a false friend. They were willing to face the fiery furnace, even if God didn't rescue them, and they were about to be hurried on to be with him in heaven. They were faithful to God. They were connected to him. They were dedicated to his love. We need to be that way too. We need to reject the false friends in our lives, and especially the false friend of fear, and cling to God instead. Here's the second way that we can live that even if life in a spirit like that. Here's what it is. Decide together to be faithful to God despite the circumstances. Now, of course, this is always where we've been heading, that we should choose to be faithful even in challenges. But the key here in the slide is that word together. Let me tell you a story. When I was in fourth grade, there was a really horrible kid in my class who kept picking on one of my friends. And I don't just mean just like teasing him. He actually threatened to beat this kid up a few times. He was kind of a classic bully. One day I was walking home with my friend and the bad kid appeared and he cornered us. And he pushed me out of the way and started punching my buddy, kind of just as he had promised he would. Now, by the way, before I tell you the rest of it, I am not some sort of super Christian now. I certainly wasn't then, but I'm not making this up. I was pushed aside and I stood nearby while my friend was getting punched, and I can still picture that moment I had because I had this conversation with myself. I said, wait a minute, I'm a Christian. I follow Jesus. Jesus died for me. I shouldn't just take the easy route and stay out of this. I should be like Jesus and let him lead me and do something about this. Maybe I had just heard the story of Shadrach and his buddies at Sunday school or something that week. Whatever it was, I was pumped up for God. So I walked right in between the bully and my friend, and I remember yelling like, punch me instead! And all of a sudden, punches were landing on me. And then I remember thinking, maybe this wasn't such a hot idea. The bully kept hitting me and hitting my friend and trying to push me out of the way so he could punch my friend some more. And I just kept putting myself in the way and taking a couple hits, and then my friend would take a couple hits, and then we would mess the bully up. It was great. Listen, that was terrible. I am totally weak. I could not possibly fight him. It really hurt. But the bad kid finally got fed up and he yelled at us and he left. It was awesome. Now, in that moment, I had chosen to faithfully stand with what I know God was calling me to be a support to my friend. Man, did it hurt. But even as a fourth grader, it made me feel so close to God. Now, too often, we think of choosing to stand up and be faithful to God as a solo thing, but really, it's a friendship. It's a together thing. My friend, even if he had wanted to stand up to that bully, he couldn't have done it alone. I couldn't either. He needed me there. I needed him there to share the punches. Who can you be there for? Who can you support? Who can you stand up with? Shadrach had Meshach. Meshach had good old Abednego by his side. And because of that, they all got to experience Jesus by their side. Sometimes we need that physical reminder from other people that Jesus is with us. He is really with us. In fact, there's a family at church who, during this pandemic, they keep sending my family pizza twice already during this time of stay at home. They've just texted me to say, listen, we're buying you pizza tonight. And now, it's such a small thing, but you know what? It always comes at exactly the right time. The day I need a break from cooking a meal, the day that something cheesy and warm will help me remember that God loves our family. Those generous church friends have helped me stand up to exhaustion and feeling alone. So listen to me here. Let's all buy each other pizza. Let's all jump into a fight and take some blows for each other. Let's at least ask if there's some way we can support each other. And that's the challenge I have for you on this point. Ask or just discover how you can support a friend who's facing a fire. I put both of those, ask, but if you can't even ask, sometimes you can, but even if you can't, just do something. Just send the pizza. Just call out of the blue, call a friend who's a nurse or a doctor and thank them for the long and stressful hours that they've been putting in. Send an encouraging note to your kid's teacher. Remind a buddy that you know who is trying to overcome addiction that you're still praying for him. Follow up with that friend from church who you know was struggling in their marriage. Faithfulness is something that we can practice together. Now, here at the end, I want to remind us, like we want to do this almost every week, about who the greatest example that we have of faithfulness, and that's, of course, Jesus himself. Jesus' whole life was dedicated to loving God and showing that love to you, and it cost him. Jesus knew, just like it's true to us, he knew that safety and security were not guaranteed for the future. In fact, his faithfulness led him to being nailed to a cross so you could be forgiven. We're going to talk about this in more detail next month in the run-up to Easter. We're going to be looking at why Jesus took the punches he did for us by dying on the cross. He was committed to being humble and caring for others, and that cost him his life. But by laying down his life, he rose from the dead to be the King of all kings, and we can be directly connected to him today. We're not being challenged to be faithful to God by someone who doesn't know how hard it is. We're being invited to share the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by Jesus himself, who knows what struggle is and was there with those guys during their ordeal. He wants to be with us too. So this week, let's just look at them one more time. Reject false friends that masquerade as certainty, especially the false friend of fear. And then the second one is this. Decide together to be faithful to God despite the circumstances. This week, have a conversation or send someone your support to show them that you're going to choose to be faithful together. It's worth it. All right, let's pray together. People who were so well connected to you that they were able to cling to you through challenges. Strengthen us, Lord God. Strengthen us in our own weakness. Grow our faith so we can be faithful in that same way. Allow us, Jesus, to love each other, to support each other even more so that we can experience you more. Thanks for that call in our lives, and thank you for giving us the strength to do it if we rely on you. We pray in your name, Jesus. Amen. Well, I'm so grateful that you were with us this week. Hey, if you're looking to get more connected, don't forget that we have both that fantastic welcome party and also our care series starting up this week. Go over to the website and get signed up for one of those. And then we'll see you back here next week.